It's my pleasure and my honour to introduce Fergus Sweeney. And Fergus Sweeney, Dr. Sweeney, is the head of Inspections and Human Medicines Division at the EMEA.
Thanks very much.
Good luck.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning and to speak with you and share ideas with you and really look at where we're going within the regulatory system in the area of transparency. It's important, and I think that the large group here, and I'm fascinated by the growth of PhUSE. I think it's an excellent path that you've been able to travel and really a very, very important stakeholder now in this process, one that I haven't been familiar with. Jim Slattery, who's a statistician on my team, I think spoke to one of your single-day events earlier in the year, so he, in fact, introduced me and explained to me. So, EMEA, European Medicines Agency, who are we? What do we do? I'll explain a little bit about that because, of course, what we can be transparent about relates to the activities that we conduct. A little bit of history about transparency at the agency and overview of some of the activities, and then I'm going to pick on three aspects really to look at in a little bit more detail because they illustrate different features of transparency and in particularly transparency that relates to databases. So looking at the areas of manufacturing, pharmacovigilance, and then clinical trials, which I think is really the hot topic now. So EMA, who are we? We're the European Medicines Agency. We're located about 40 minutes from here in Canary Wharf. And our mission, the mission of the agency, is to foster scientific evidence in the evaluation and supervision of medicines for the benefit of public and animal health. We cover both human and veterinary medicines, and were established in 1995 to operate what is called a centralized procedure, so to deliver single marketing authorizations for the EU. We're designed to coordinate and mobilize the scientific resources of the member states. We work with a large network. We have 28 member states now, 4,500, 5,000 experts among the agencies of those member states. I think there are 51 agencies in all, obviously because you have some are human and vet and other arrangements in individual member states. We do that for the evaluation and supervision of medicines, to coordinate inspections, which are then carried out by the inspectors of the member states, to advise on research and development programs, providing scientific advice, but also guidance, extensive guidance in many areas, which then is the collaborative view of the member states and of their experts and agencies. We're responsible for the centralized procedure, marketing authorization, pharmacovigilance, scientific advice, orphan product designations, pediatric investigation plans, arbitration and referrals if there are problems with medicines, whether they're centrally authorized or nationally authorized member state, or the Commission can refer that, and then there is an arbitration procedure which goes through the agency. So we have a harmonized outcome on areas of concern, of safety. And in particular, relevant to what we're doing today, the provision of good quality and independent information on the medicines it evaluates to patients and healthcare providers. So that mandate to provide information and therefore to be transparent is part of our mission and the coordination of inspections. So you have the various committees, starting out with what was then the CPMP and the CVMP when the agency was founded, and now so the Human Medicinal Products, Veterinary Medicinal Products Committees, but now also the Pediatric Committee, Orphan Committee, Committee on Advanced Therapies, Committee for Herbal Products, and the newest Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, and indeed, with that new legislation, setting up the pharmacovigilance. Many more aspects of transparency are built into that. So a little bit of history and overview. It's a long series of initiatives. We'll be celebrating our 20th anniversary next year, which coincides with the 50th anniversary of the European pharmacovigilance, pharmaceutical legislation. So for those of you who were reading the official journal in 1965, there was the founding 6565 EC directive, which began the process of establishing pharmaceutical legislation in Europe. But in 1995, the agency was founded, and the European Public Assessment Report was one of the first transparency initiatives. And it excited huge discussion at that time. This was making public the scientific detail of the discussion and assessment, the key points that arose, and how they were resolved during the assessment of individual medicines. And that was quite revolutionary at that time. It became accepted. It's now standard. And of course, the desire for information, the need for more information expands. We have the SPC and patient information, again in all languages from the start. Published our list of experts. Then starting with summaries of opinions. We have our rules and legislation on access to documents. Orphan drug designations, PIP opinions. So progressively, more and more information being put into the public domain. Recommendations on transparency established with the heads of medicines agencies and EMEA, so the whole European network coming together and looking at issues in relation to the marketing authorization applications, and of course always the complexity of commercially confidential information and what is that, how is that defined, and personal data protection, which aspect you'll be discussing, I think, a lot during the day. Vigilance access policy, I'll come back to that, the ADR website, the existing clinical trials, GMP, the manufacturer's website, so I'll talk about these three later in my presentation. All of our declarations of interests of staff and experts, and more articles coming out, scientific publications, really making every effort to bring more and more information, more and more understanding of what we're doing and how we arrive at our decisions, and allow people to examine those. More and more our workshops are web streamed, stakeholder workshops increasingly carried out, code of conduct for staff. The PRAC, I said, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee in the legislation has increased mandate for transparency, requirement for transparency, and with that now we have lists of products under additional monitoring. Before every PRAC, we publish the signals that we're going to be examining, the pharmacovigilance signals, potential adverse reaction problems. The agendas and minutes of all our scientific meetings are now published, and we've got public hearings to come. We published a draft guidance earlier this year on the conduct of public hearings. So again, the discussion on pharmaceuticals becoming more and more public. Access to documents, legislation enabled people to request documents. We get 450, 500 requests a month for information and documents. We have guidance on our website as to what we can and can't publish at what stages, depending on the decision-making process. But of course, that information only goes to the requester. They are free to share it. If somebody else asks for the same information, we can provide it to them. But it's public, but not publicly available, accessible on the web. So greater transparency is clearly a further step to make information which can be available to all, and the concepts of proactive publication rather than constantly responding piecemeal to requests is very much at the core of what we're trying to achieve. So what is transparency for? Why should the deliberations on medicines be public? Why should information on the authorization of medicines be public and on their monitoring post-authorization? Well, of course, it creates a public record. People can see this is what was done, this is how it was done, this is what was decided, so that there is a clear base of information. But that information is also then there for a reference. It may be used for other reasons to drive other activities, and it's there for scrutiny and critique. A decision on a medicine is made at a particular point in time with a particular reference base of data, but of course life moves on, information moves on, more data is collected, and the situation changes, and of course we are constantly monitoring that, but so are other specialists in academia who can conduct other metadata analyses, for example. It's there to inform and enable participation in discussion, enable a person to find a clinical trial that they may find suitable for their healthcare, or that they wish to participate in, or their doctor to find that. It increases the availability of knowledge, and the availability of knowledge drives innovation, it drives research, and therefore contributes to the improvement of healthcare. And all of these are important. But it brings us all, and I think the discussions of the last several years have clearly illustrated, it brings the different parties involved past their comfort zone. It's uncomfortable, very uncomfortable for the pharma industry. How much of their development can they share? Regulators, we've made decisions. They are now going to be critiqued and questioned. Other information will come. Meta-analyses will come. Some of them will be false positives or negatives. Others will be clear signals that need to be acted on and where something new has been uncovered. So it gives us greater challenges in the way we work. For academia, as much as industry people like to protect their ideas, there are times when it's not good to open up the research because it's still going on and you might distort the outcome of that research, so it needs to be carefully managed. And of course for patients, increasingly with a desire to see and be able to analyze individual patient data at the same time, they need to be protected and they want to be assured that their private life and person is protected. So all of this brings us new challenges, brings every party new challenges, but we are there to assure the public that we are doing our best to bring them good medicines, to keep them safe, or as safe as they can be, and to assure the quality of those medicines. They are the citizens we serve. The healthcare providers and carers, but really especially the patients and consumers. So at the end, I think that the transparency is there to move us on. Historically, medicine, the treatment of patients, has been very much one of trust. A patient trusted the doctor, trusted the regulator, trusted those making decisions. You didn't try and participate in that. But public data and information now is there and is needed to generate trust. People don't grant and shouldn't be expected to grant trust sight unseen. So it's there to generate trust, an understanding that nothing is hidden, that all clinical trials are known and have been accounted for and considered. But you can then build confidence. If people have information, they can start to understand what's happening and have confidence in the system. So not just blind trust, but confidence based on information and knowledge. And with knowledge comes empowerment, because knowledge gives you the ability to make considered decisions about yourself, about your treatment, or a doctor about the treatments he will offer. So now 3 aspects of transparency, and first starting with manufacturing. I've picked these 3 because they illustrate different aspects of transparency, how it operates, and how it's used. But at the end of the day, you pick up a medicine, you go to the pharmacy, perhaps you buy it from an internet pharmacy. Does the tablet in the box contain what the pack says? We hear more and more about falsified medicines. They are a real problem, and we need to assure that the supply chain has good, tight rules and that we control the medicines that are supplied. People want to know, is the tablet genuine? But also, is the manufacturer controlled? Is the person making that tablet controlled, inspected, and meeting standards? And of course, it's the inspectors of the national authorities who do that. So the UDRA GMP database, now called UDRA GMDP, so UDRA Good Manufacturing and Distribution Practice, was established, and that acts as a database for all manufacturers and inspections of those manufacturers in the EU and manufacturers outside the EU who've been inspected by the European authorities. It gives indication of their compliance status, their GMP compliance status, and that has been expanded under the falsified medicines legislation to include manufacturing and import authorizations, GMP certificates, statements of non-compliance, but also GMP inspection planning in third countries so we can work with authorities outside of Europe. But under the new legislation, we also have wholesale distribution authorizations, GDP certificates, and their statements of non-compliance and registration of manufacturers, importers, and distributors of active substance. Now, the reason for putting that on the web is, yes, a patient can look at a box and say, is the manufacturer on that list? But it's particularly using transparency in this case to secure the supply chain. The legislation requires that any actor, so a wholesale distributor, a manufacturer, or an end purchaser of product, can check and be assured of the bona fides of their supplier and of their customers. So as you move down the supply chain, each party has to do upstream and downstream check. And once this database is fully populated, it requires a cycle to have all the manufacturing sites and distribution sites in there. That will provide a complete check of the parties in the supply chain. So the distributors can use that. So it's using transparency to drive a desired regulatory outcome, in this case, to secure the supply chain. So it's there as a public reference, mainly used by the industry to check the supply chain and by our international partners, so they can look, did the Europeans inspect those sites? So if they did, maybe we'll go somewhere else, or we can work together. We have a way of joining that up. And it's the basis of reference, so it's using integrity to protect the supply chain. Now, coming on to pharmacovigilance, we have adverse reactions reported by doctors, by patients, by companies. So people ask themselves, are adverse reactions being reported for this medicine? If I report an adverse reaction, will that be taken into account? Can I report one? If something's happened to me, how I can tell my doctor, will he report it, or can I report it directly myself? How does that work? I'm a researcher. I'm looking at this area. Can I have access to data for analysis? So we have the UDRA Vigilance Access Policy, which was published in a number of years ago, developed in 2009 and 2011, and it's to improve public health by facilitating the safety monitoring of medicines. It's to support signal detection activities by the marketing authorization holders themselves, but also to inform healthcare professionals and the general public by publishing the data and allow for research. I won't go into the details, but we've different stakeholder groups from the authorities through marketing authorization holders and sponsors of trials, research organizations, academia, healthcare providers, and the public. And there are different levels of data provided, and for researchers can, on request, get access to data sets. They need to come to us, propose a research, and then there is a kind of reciprocal transparency that in order to release that data. Remember, this is individual records of individual people's adverse reactions. We have a duty of care both under the data protection legislation and to assure that that data is well used. So we like also to hear back what the outcome of that research is and have an opportunity to comment and perhaps to clarify how the data works, how it's structured. It's not the complete data on adverse reactions. There are other sources as well in PSURs, etc., clinical trial reports. So we need to assure that the outcomes are well described and the data hasn't been misunderstood. But that then enables academia to carry out research and use that information. And this is the website, and you can see here there's a click, how to report side effects, and that's for patients, and then they can come to their national websites and find out in their individual countries, look for a medicine, alphabetical order, and then you get aggregated data and you can drill down. This is for centrally authorized products. We've just 2 weeks ago also released for about 1,100 nationally authorized products, which are on the EU reference data list and subject to monitoring. And then you can see in demographic and then by adverse reaction type and body types and MEDRA headings, the adverse reactions being reported. So it's another way of sharing data. In this case, it has particular constraints because this is individual person data. So what's public is aggregated, and then what's shared with researchers is done so in a particular framework and agreement with those specific researchers. We will also be sharing now in the future with the WHO Uppsala Monitoring Center, so contributing to the global understanding of adverse reactions, and eventually with other international regulatory authorities on an ad hoc basis. The WHO updates will be regular. But we need to maintain the confidentiality of the individual patients and their identity, and the data elements have also been updated in line with the ISO ICH E2B R3, so progressing with the development of huge vigilance, and in fact the need to update the policy was partly driven by the need to increase transparency, but also to realign it with the new technical specifications. And clinical trials. There's a lot happening now on clinical trials. It's a very exciting area, and I think a lot in the rest of the day is about that. Clinical trials are a medical investigation experiment in human beings, and it's really a fundamental now of international ethical standards and regulatory standards that all trials are publicly registered. And part of the exercise is it's creating a public record, ensuring that no trial is lost, no trial goes unreported, and that all trials relevant are considered at any particular point when decisions are being made. But also people want to know, is there a trial I could participate in, or that my loved one, my child, my father could participate in? Is there one I could find for my patients? And if you're in an area of orphan disease, that can be extremely important. But if I did participate in a trial, what happened? What happened to the results? Did it work? Didn't it work? Did they even use the results? So I want to know, as a participant, what happened. But then trials are used as one of the major bases for marketing authorization decisions. So we need to know what trials were used there and what were their results. And further then, when they're on the market, what's known about the medicine I'm taking? Can it be reanalyzed? What is the trial we are designing already conducted? So there are various questions depending on your point of view. So clinical studies in marketing authorizations, as I presume you will all have seen, or certainly all those keen will have seen, we have adopted now the policy on clinical study reports relating to study reports submitted to the EMEA, to the centralized procedure in marketing authorization applications. That was published on the 2nd of October this year, following adoption by our management board, and will take effect on clinical study reports submitted in marketing authorization applications as of the 1st of January of 2015, so next year. With two main objectives, and these are part of what I already described: to enable public scrutiny, establishing trust and confidence in the system, but also to enable the application of new knowledge in future research, again, driving forward knowledge, research, innovation. It's been a long process. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of lively discussion. You've contributed to that discussion in various aspects. We've had a public workshop, many advisory groups, so it's 22nd of November 2012, so even going back to an article in April 2012. Many more months of consultation on the draft policy. We got 1,138 comments. We publish a lot of guidelines. That's way up there with the top commented guidelines of all time, if I can put it that way. Many, many stakeholders contributed. Final targeted discussion, roundtable discussions with a range of stakeholders. And finally then in June and October, discussion at our management board and unanimous adoption at the Management Board earlier this month, and hence its publication. The scope is clinical data, so clinical reports, and that includes clinical overviews and summaries, as well as the clinical study reports and their appendices, so the protocol and aggregated data and individual patient data, submitted under the centralized procedure, either the initial application or post-authorization, Article 58 procedures, and submitted after the effective date. Not within scope are the legacy data, clinical data for products authorized outside of the centralized procedures, the nationally authorized products, and the adverse reaction data, ICSRs. So we needed this policy because there's no specific legal mandate to publish third-party reports in the way. So we had to achieve a balanced approach between the interests of the public, of researchers, and of the parties involved, including both the patients and the companies, to discourage unfair commercial use of the data and use a publication process. So we have two terms of use there. Clinical reports will be available on screen, so it's a library of all the study reports in the future used in marketing authorizations for any member of the public. You just log on, get a user ID and password in a simple process, and you can use that for general information to search that. For those who wish to look at those in more detail, to download them, to be able to search them, etc., then these can be used for academic and non-commercial purposes and involves a more specific registration, clearly identifying the parties who are joining. Common rules: trial subjects must not be re-identified. No attempt to re-identify patients should be taken. Clinical reports may not be used to support marketing authorization procedures in other territories, so in violation of intellectual property protection. No unfair commercial use may be made. There's a watermark applied to all, and EMEA doesn't accept responsibility for monitoring compliance with those terms of use. We manage the commercially confidential information, but generally information in clinical study reports is not considered commercially confidential. Some limited information may be. We've established redaction principles, but always the company must justify why something is redacted, and if it is, we will review that and we will make the final decision on whether or not that should be published. So we have access to clinical reports and a process for that. We need to protect patients' identity, and to progress with individual patient data, we need further investigation. So the initial round is about the study reports and aggregated data. We now need to look at developing methodology for avoiding re-identification of patients and how individual patient data could be released. So stepwise implementation: first phase, the study reports; second phase, IPD. 1st of January for new applications, 1st of July for extensions of indications. Other post-authorization procedures, we will see how the thing goes and move on with that. So we've paved the way, really led breakthrough in this area. It's no longer a matter, as Guido Razia said, of if, but of how. Pharmaceutical industry has become much more proactive itself in sharing data. I think everybody's come on board. The comfort zone has moved. We are now much more comfortable. The industry is more comfortable with sharing this data. Debate has moved from all CSRs. You go back 5-10 years, study reports were commercially confidential. They are not. There are very small pieces of some of them which might be. And the next step is to prepare for implementation. Consultation with stakeholders will continue. We need to develop the processes and the software platforms. And finally, clinical trials in the EU. We have the existing legislation, the EU Clinical Trial Register, which sets out information, structured information, kind of structured summary of protocols and of results, and now preparation for the new clinical trial regulation. This is the EU Clinical Trials Register. It's on our website. You can find it. It currently, or at the time I made this slide over the weekend, it had 24,102 clinical trials with information on the protocol. 3,216 of those are with subjects less than 18, so they're pediatric, whether in their entirety, or at least with some subjects under 18 as part of the protocol inclusion criteria. We also display nearly 18,000 studies, older studies, that were submitted as part of the Article 45. So marketing authorization holders were required, as part of the pediatric regulation, to submit information on all studies that had already been conducted in pediatric populations with their products. So they submitted that. It was launched in March 2011 with the protocol or results data for phase 2, 3, and 4 trials, so not trials in adult healthy volunteer populations, all phases of pediatric trials, and also trials which are carried out as part of a PIP, a pediatric investigation plan. Once the competent authority decision is positive and an ethics committee opinion has been recorded in USERA CT, all the phase 2 to 4 adult trial protocol summary is published, but for pediatric trials, the publication will occur whether or not the ethics committee was positive or negative. And pediatric trials outside of the EEA are also included if they're part of a PIP plan, and results summaries for pediatric trials are also submitted. Internationally, that now means that we have been participating in the HL7 clinical trial registries and results. We've shared our data structures and involved in that discussion. I think that is now reanimating more for the results summary part, and so we will continue mapping and providing data ongoing. There have been test XML standards for our trial registry. Our platform now includes a test bed, so if you want to try your results summary structures, load those, test those without producing test information in the live system, you can do that. You can join the test system and test out or train people on that system. We're linked now to the WHO International Clinical Trial Registry platform. We are a primary register for that platform since March 2012. And there's a lot of discussion and plans. We've had close interaction with clinicaltrials.gov, and particularly for the results summaries, worked to keep the large part of the data structure and data model the same as theirs, because clearly there needs to be one version of the truth out there. We can't have multiple different angles on the same trial, which would cause a lot of confusion and a greater burden, because academia and industry would have to produce essentially the same data, but with slightly different cuts for different platforms. So now finally, the clinical trial regulation that was published on the 27th of May of this year in the official journal, agreed after a long period of difficult negotiation, many 29 meetings of the Council Working Party, but it's there now. Detailed 99 articles, of which about half either mandate a functionality of an IT system or rules, workflows, processes that should go through that system. The scope are interventional clinical trials, so the same as the old or existing clinical trial legislation, with more than one or more investigator sites in the EU. So a trial authorized to take place in the EU. Any interventional trial on medicines, whether it's academic or industry-driven, whether it's on a product with marketing authorization or without marketing authorization. But this offers a huge opportunity for Europe now. With one electronic application through one single EU portal and database, you achieve the application for what is currently the separate competent authority and ethics committee, and you achieve that for as many member states and as many investigator sites in Europe as your trial needs, with one application. You then get coordinated trial review, authorization, and supervision, and transparency. This single application also provides the registration both for the initial trial, for its conduct and results. The legislation also provides enhanced protection for trial subjects, special provisions for emergency trials and cluster trials, streamlined reporting for adverse reactions and annual safety reports. These will now come only to EUDRA Vigilance in the future and then be redistributed by our system to the member states, so just one single route of electronic reporting, proportionate rules for the approaches to trial supervision and conduct, depending essentially on the knowledge and understanding of the product and its marketing authorization status. Now, the regulation provides for transparency. The EU database shall be publicly available by default, unless one of these exceptions apply. So it's not, yes, you can request pieces of it if you come to us. It's this database will be publicly available, readable to the public, unless one of the exceptions apply. They are to protect personal data, and in this case, and it's worth emphasizing, the regulation states that individual patient data will not be included in the EU database. So the whole IPD discussion that you're having and we'll have later today isn't specifically addressed here because the legislation excludes individual patient data of trial subjects. Protection of commercially confidential information, in particular taking account of the marketing authorization status of the product, because obviously many of the products that are tested will never have a marketing authorization. Others will only have that later. But unless there is an overriding public interest in disclosure. Protect confidential communication between member states in preparing the assessment report and ensure effective supervision. So that's the whole inspection and enforcement process, which cannot always be carried out effectively if it's in the public domain, particularly before it happens. But on the results of trials, every trial should be registered in public before it starts, and when it ends, the results of every trial should be available. So a summary of results should be made public 12 months after the trial has ended, and that's a structured summary, so very similar to what's on the EU Clinical Trial Register at the moment, if you look in the annex to the regulation. But also new is a layperson's summary. So a more descriptive summary of the trial for consumption by lay people. We're talking about current numbers between 4,000 and 5,000 trials per year. So that's between 4,000 and 5,000 structured summaries, between 4,000 and 5,000 lay summaries. So it's going to be very challenging to establish standards, particularly for the lay summaries, to get a consistent and useful set of information out to the public. MAHs then, so this is for the trial sponsors, this is for the marketing authorization holder, is required to submit the study report once the marketing authorization procedure is complete, whether it's positive or negative, or withdrawn by the applicant. This will apply to trials within the scope of the regulation, so those with EU sites and authorized under the new regulation or transition to it. There's a 3-year transition period. And member states should introduce penalties for breach of the transparency provisions. If sponsors or MAHs aren't loading the information they should, then there should be consequences. So the agency is tasked with setting up this portal. It will be subject to independent audit, that it meets a set of functional specifications which are agreed between the agency, the Commission, and the member states. And once we've set that system up and the regulation is running, because it can't run, its implementation is dependent on that audit and on the satisfaction of our management board and the Commission that we meet the system meets the functional specifications, the Commission will then publish a notice in the official journal. But after that, we should maintain and update the portal in accordance with experience acquired. And I've emphasized this, and particularly in other rooms where the sponsors and the people dealing with the regulatory aspects are present. We don't need to cross every T and dot every I. We should meet the essential requirements of the legislation, first of all, and of the different stakeholder groups, and then learn with experience, and we are required to update it. So, regulation published on the 27th of May. Functional specifications for audit to be agreed by the management board. We're going to our December meeting. We then build the system, have it available for audit. The audit is carried out. We reckon that'll take about 4 months. The Commission then publishes its notice, and 6 months later, the regulation comes into force. That cannot be earlier than the 28th of May 2016, but remember there are 6 months of notice in the official journal and then about 4 months for the process of audit and follow-up, so that's, if you like, dead time from a development point of view before the system can come into operation. There's a 3-year transition period where the old and the new will operate together, not just the IT, but also the regulatory process at the member state level. so we will have to manage that as well. So we have a range of IT activities. There's the portal and database, medical product dictionary. It'll be very interesting for you because also products without marketing authorization should now also be included. We need to set up a process for that, for sponsors to register those. Safety reporting streamlined, as I described, and then we'll have to ensure that the existing information can be searched and retrieved and found in conjunction with the new data set. And of course, the various data warehouse applications we'll need. We're consulting with stakeholders, obviously the member states and the Commission, but also various sponsors, academic and industry, CROs, patient organizations, public, on this process with various subgroups looking at the dossier and data structure and the various process aspects within the system. I think I've covered all that already, but it really is offering a big new opportunity to Europe to have a standard system. Now, the key message here today is that on Friday we published the draft functional specifications for the portal and database that are required by Article 82 of the legislation. It's published for a short 3-week consultation. Please look, please comment. They are high-level functional requirements, not details of process flow or data elements, but it's very important that you take this opportunity. We have to move forward quickly because until we get this fixed, we can't start building. So that's why it's not a 6-month consultation, because that would just delay the implementation of the legislation, which we can't have. So please send your comments by 31st of October to gcp@emea.europa.eu. If you go to our homepage and click on the public consultation website, it was top of the list over the weekend, maybe still today, so you can click on there and find it. This illustration is from the functional specifications, and just to say that they set out the requirements for the portal as legally defined. So portal, if I can say, with an EU portal, capital P, and the EU database, which will contain the information designated by the legislation. Obviously, we have other safety databases, data warehouses, and the portals through which that information will be accessed, but they are not part of the EU portal and EU database designated by Article 82 of the legislation, and which forms the basis of the functional specifications. There will also be a workspace, so basically case management and workflow tools to support sponsors in compiling their applications, member states in routing and compiling their activities, and from there they will post the necessary information, goes through the portal to the database, and that is then public. And we also have to define the interface with member state systems, with big and small member states. Some of them have systems, and we'll further develop those. They need to be able to read data and documents out and put data documents back in the system. So it's just a summary of the different activities and documents that have to be put through by the sponsor, the marketing authorization applicant, the European Commission for the Union control reports, the member states involved in assessment, and of course the public viewing the database and information on the web. And there we don't need terms of use or conditions or registration. The information is legally mandated, and therefore it's open, free of access on the internet for what can be published. In terms of transparency, we still have to have some discussion to carefully interpret the legal requirements. And we are preparing additional text, so you will see in the functional specification document that additional text will be added to Section 5 and Table 2, become an integral part of these functional specifications, be agreed through the same mechanisms with the member states and the Commission, with a short public consultation, and then final confirmation by the member states and the Commission, and endorsement by our management board. And we need to complete that process by March of 2015 so that we can finalize aspects of the design of the system and pursue its implementation. So to close and to reiterate, public data and information about medicines, their development and authorization, are there to generate trust. Public trust in the system, public trust in medicines. To build confidence, to build understanding. You have confidence in things that you understand. If you understand the regulatory process, the clinical trial development process, and you understand how the system works and what information is there, you have greater confidence. So it's not blind trust, it's informed confidence. And with that, you gain knowledge, and that empowers people. Empowers their decision-making about their health, about their treatment, about that of their loved ones, or that of their patients if they're healthcare providers. And that's important. We have to put people in a position where they can make informed decisions for their benefit. So thank you very much.